If mining is an attempt to do an equitable distribution of decision-making authority based on how much work or money you're willing to invest through the mining process, then this is essentially the same thing, except instead of having to make a continuous investment, you just have to acquire the Mastercoin once.
Well, yeah, it's sort of equivalent to mining, but we're not generating any new Mastercoins in this process, right? It's just the decision-making process. If a Bitcoin miner can decide, for example, on which fees they want and what sort of transactions to accept, so a Mastercoin user can decide how the protocol evolves, but they're not trying to generate any new Mastercoins. The amount of Mastercoins that will ever exist was generated in August, and there's no reason to generate any more.
So how many total Mastercoins were generated in August, including the dev Mastercoins and the ones that were funded in?
So the number is about 600,000. Maybe David can remember the exact number. It's in our FAQ. That's about the amount. I think about 9% of that goes to dev Mastercoins, and those will just be distributed to the community.
Sure, I can give you the numbers on that. There were a total of 619,478 Mastercoins put into existence between August 1st and August 31st. Now, most of those were through people contributing funds to the Exodus address. Specifically, that was 563,061 Mastercoins were bought via the Exodus address. And I'm just pulling these numbers off of MastercoinExplorer.com and MasterChess.info. There's lots of links on mastercoin.org to all the different parsers and explorers and wallets. And so the difference between those two numbers, the 563,000 and the 619,000, is 50,000 or so dev coins. And the way that the protocol works, if you read the protocol, basically when anybody sent a Bitcoin to the Exodus address, they generated 100 Mastercoins. And it was completely open, right? Anybody could send as many Bitcoins as they wanted to the Exodus address and generate these coins. It's an open process. But protocol also details that for every 10 coins that were generated, 1 dev coin was generated, and that it would be set aside and distributed using this algorithm over time, 50% the first year, 25% the second year, 12.5% the third year, and so on, in order to incentivize developers. And so those are the two pools. As Ron said earlier, they're interchangeable, they're fungible, but they were all generated at the time of the Exodus address, and that's the cap. There'll never be any more.
It's amazing to me we've gotten as far into this interview, and I haven't actually asked this question yet. What can I do with a Mastercoin?
So the immediate thing and the very first feature is the distributed exchange. And so that's what is getting built out first. As Ron was describing earlier, that's kind of the baseline function that makes most of the other functions of Mastercoin work. So if I wanted to sell Mastercoins for Bitcoins, I can now do that with this distributed exchange. Now that's interesting, but it becomes really useful as soon as people begin issuing tokens on top of Mastercoin using the user currencies. Now all of a sudden I can use my Mastercoins to buy into API coin and host coin and compute coin. I literally know of more than a dozen planned decentralized applications already that are planning to operate on top of Mastercoin as the smart property and the user currency features come out in the next few months. And in fact, I had a lot of fun this weekend. I went to a 72-hour hackathon called Startup Weekend. It's actually a global event hosted in 100 cities. And I worked with a team of developers this weekend to build API Coin, which I used some software from a company that I built and run called Engine.co. And we open sourced a bunch of the code we had done around API aggregation, data normalization, basically making it really easy for developers to use a lot of different APIs. That's a service that exists out there, right? There are companies like Singly and Mashup and others, but they're all using a centralized network type of approach, right? I have to pay them per call. It's not open source. So if they've got bugs, I can't fix it. If they don't support the APIs I want, I'm out of luck. And so what we said is, look, we can use this new token system, this new user currency system that Mastercoin gives us to issue a token for API coin. And anybody who wants to access this new API engine application can use API coin to do it. And it's completely open source and it's completely decentralized. So anybody can download the code and offer the API and compete on price for the market to offer this API to people that want to use it for developers to build applications. And so it was an incredible weekend. We built the API layer. Anybody can go to apiengine.co, check out the white paper, check out the GitHub repos, all that kind of stuff. We moved quickly enough that people were building applications on top of API Engine this weekend. And we actually ended up, I'm very excited to say, we won the competition. There were about 100 people there, ended up forming into about 13 teams. And the judges thought this way of monetizing, creating this token and using it for the operations of the application was so novel that they gave us the winning ticket. And so just an incredible weekend. But there's a lot of those applications. I know people doing protocols and white papers for a host coin, right? Where you have this coin on top of Mastercoin, and people are providing hosting power and they're competing to do that. And they're using this token system to offer that service. And I know people working on Compute Coin, which is a little more complex and difficult to offer compute power for something similar. I know people doing Arbitration Coin and Insure Coin. And so there's all this incredible variety of applications. And that's why I titled the white paper, The Emerging Wave of Decentralized Applications. No joke. We're going to see a lot of these type of applications come out in the very near future as the Mastercoin features get flushed out, debugged, and really scaled up, first with the decentralized exchange, and then right after that with smart property and user currencies.
You guys aren't the only people working in this space. And the other kind of competitor in the arena is Invictus Innovations with their distributed autonomous corporation concept. And it seems like you guys have very similar projects, just with like different approaches towards basically the same thing. Am I correct in identifying these as very similar, except that it seems like they view everything as a type 1 and you view that as inefficient because then you have to reinvent the wheel each time. In your designs, it's preferable to start from a type 2 built on top of a type 1 and then have all of these other individual coins be type 3s on top of the type 2. Is that the logic here, why that's the preferable way to go?
We know Dan, we know the team at Invictus, have a lot of respect for them. It's funny. I was actually writing my white paper at the time in which they released theirs. And I thought they did a really good job of describing a lot of the ethics and a lot of the possibility around this. Where we differ exactly is really just implementation. And it's a question of, okay, we ought to build this on top of existing blockchains, therefore we don't have to reinvent the security wheel, and there are other advantages that, but it's also, I think, a really important question of language. I put this in the paper, I put it in the appendix. The biggest word in their terminology that I really can't agree with is the idea of a corporation. Corporation, it's a useful framework, but it has so much legal baggage. It has so much historical baggage. It has so much legacy meaning for the state incorporated version of what they're talking about. I'm really very reticent to use that term because I think you're going to drag in, without meaning to, a lot of regulatory and compliance issues that don't exist if we're just talking about this is a computer application, right? There's no company, there's no employees, there's no profit, there's no revenue. None of that stuff exists, right? All of that is legacy of this old corporate structure. If we can build an entirely new model using these tokens, then I don't think we run into nearly as many regulatory issues as if we're trying to recreate the corporation with this old vestiges of how it used to work.
I personally am not, a big legal guy or politics guy, and I know David is focusing on the differences between our approach and their approach, but maybe in the terminology. But all in all, I think both of us, we have this roughly the same goals, right? Of fighting decentralization or fighting centralization, or providing an alternative and infrastructure to build decentralized applications or corporations or whatever you call them. Personally, I was really inspired by them, okay? Because at first, when Willett started working on the paper, and even later on when we started adding the new features, I think that Mastercoin is an exchange platform, right? That's its primary function, just being a platform where people can exchange types of value. But then we started adding these new kind of features of voting on spec changes and voting on budget allocation and various other features. And I also, concurrently with that, at the same time, I started looking deeper into what Invictus is doing. And I realized that they have this vision of decentralized autonomous corporations, and they're sort of building that top down, right? They know that where they want to go, and they're identified a few key components of that infrastructure, and they're building those components one by one. And I think that we are actually doing the same thing, but from a bottom-up direction. We are already a decentralized application, right? As David described, we were doing all this sort of stuff, and we have the Mastercoin tokens, which are useful and used for the Mastercoin application. So we're building all these infrastructure components for ourselves. So the natural extension of this would be to allow other companies or other ideas or entrepreneurs or developers, whatever you call them. So you allow all these people to use the same infrastructure that we build for ourselves to run their applications. So we're doing the same thing. We're just approaching it from two different directions.
Right. I mean, it seems like this is really the direction that cryptocurrency, I mean, do you call it cryptocurrency anymore? I guess it's just crypto assets at a certain point. Something like Bitcoin is cryptocurrency, but something like these, like the futures markets or, the betting markets, it's not the same, is it?
Yeah, well, it's technically a cryptocurrency. Like everything you run on top of the internet is TCP/IP, and at some level it's lower protocols. But the currency aspect sort of blends into the other decentralized token system aspect. As I said, I'm not a big semantics guy. You can look at it from different aspects. Maybe it's both a currency and an application and tokens. It's up to the user and the specific use case to decide.
One last point about the Invictus to Mastercoin comparison. One of the words that they put a lot of emphasis on is autonomous. And I think that based on our conversation, you guys also, the Mastercoin project is also moving towards very autonomous operation. But I noticed that that's not something that made it distributed application doesn't say autonomous explicitly in it. Is there a reason for that?
It's really just a question of we're trying to come up and coin a term that can be used by a broad enough audience. And so if it's 3 words, it really just becomes an acronym, right? So it becomes a DAC very quickly. And so if you think of terms that are widely used and understood, and this was a lot of contributions by Steven, he's really the branding guy. And you think of something like social media. That's a term that emerged to describe a certain set of applications. And you had one word as the anchor word, right? Everybody understood what media was. And the new characteristics is social media, right? And that became to describe, the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world. Right. And so thinking about it in that frame of how do we speak to a broader community with a easy to understand term, we thought about applications as the good anchor word, right? Everybody knows what an app is, right? Thanks to Apple's commercials, right? There's an app for everything, right? So everybody knows an application. They use applications, they use software, very familiar word, good anchor word. But you want a second word that is the descriptor. And I think decentralized can encompass autonomous. And actually, in the white paper, I explicitly include autonomous as one of the things it has to be in order to qualify as decentralized. So it has to have a token system. It can't be controlled by a central entity. And that's sort of the definition of autonomous. It has to work on top of these blockchains that are themselves distributed. And so, yeah, absolutely. I love autonomous. I love distributed. I love decentralized. And I think we agree on all those aspects. Right.
It's just about making it into a marketable term that can actually catch on.
Right. Because, things like crypto don't have a lot of currency, pun intended, outside of the Bitcoin community, right? That crypto sounds like something scary. It's something to do with, cryptography. I don't understand this. And so I don't necessarily know if it's the right thing to go out to the mainstream with. And so we're trying to really how do we coin the term for what these things are? And so decentralized applications or simply distributed apps or distributed applications for short or for informal use, I think is a good way of describing the concept we're all talking about, but in a way that people can understand, right? It's an application. It's not just a regular application. It's decentralized. It's not controlled by a central company, which means it's built on open source and it has these tokens and no one person controls it, right? So I think that's a really useful frame to explain this in. And that's really easy to get your head around.
I think that in Bitcoin and in cryptocurrency, broadly speaking, there's a temptation to solve problems because they are problems that would be better if they were solved. But that doesn't always necessarily jive with our legal system around the world. Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous creator of Bitcoin, disappeared, I believe, in at least partly because, standing beside such a disruptive creation can only conceivably cause trouble for the individuals who did the creating. In your paper, you talk about open source as a legal model to follow. Do you think that this would have offered enough protection for Satoshi? And are there any scenarios where you don't view open source as enough protection for starting something disruptive?
That's a really good question. And this is a really important question to what we're doing at the Mastercoin Foundation. So we're actually assembling a team of legal experts as an advisory board and a legal director. We've already initiated the search. We're reaching out to different legal experts in currency and cryptocurrency on different regulations. And our goal is to really, sort of set the tone and really lead this conversation and proactively, not reactively after something happens, and say, look, here's our view from a legal perspective. And we think it's well-founded. And I do think open source is a really good model from a legal and regulatory perspective to follow for these things. And, for Satoshi, he was doing something incredibly new, and he was doing it essentially starting just as one guy, right? And he got the crypto community excited and then broader hacker community excited. But I think we have a much broader base that we're starting on because of the existing Bitcoin community. I mean, everybody involved in Mastercoin, they're Bitcoiners, right? So they get the terminology, they understand what's going on. And so we have a much broader base. And my hope is, we can do this in an open and transparent way. We ought to be smart and we ought to do things according to the rules. And we encourage everybody at the Mastercoin, know your jurisdiction, know what you can and can't do. Don't do things that aren't acceptable in your jurisdiction. And we think that this gives people a tool set. Having this, new protocol gives people a tool set to build it however they need to build it in their particular jurisdiction. And that's, I think, the real key is you have a centralized solution and then you have to do compliance everywhere or block IPs or this and that. This is just a set of open source software and anybody can use it to build it in a way that works inside of their jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions will be very friendly, like Germany has been to Bitcoin or, China has been to Bitcoin, but some jurisdictions will be less friendly. And that's inevitable, but having that diversity of implementations, I think, is really, really important.
We talked about a couple of Type 3 distributed applications that are in development or that are coming, and they were all kind of technical. Compute coin, API coin, all of these things. I mean, I think I have a okay understanding of them, but I know a lot of our listeners won't. These feel almost like they are also layers of infrastructure that will have things built on top of them. Are there any end user products that are actually being developed that somebody like me who isn't necessarily building a website or anything would have a use for? Is there anything really interesting upfront right now that doesn't need to be built?
I'm not aware of any group trying right now to develop this, but I can see this coming very quickly. And that's the idea of a social coin, right? And then there are a few other groups doing infrastructure, but this is something that every user can understand, right? It's the decentralized version of Facebook can be built on top of Mastercoin and then these other layers. You would have a decentralized application, decentralized social network, where you would need a social token in order to create an account, in order to log into your account and to use it.
Are there applications where once they're built, there'll be something that a normal person would want to use as opposed to a service would want to build on top of? Because like Compute Coin, you're going to build on top of that, right? Someone comes along and they build on top of it and create something. I mean, right?
Yeah, that's correct. But I have the vision of one key user-facing application that could be built on top of this is social coin, right? A decentralized social Facebook, a social network. We've seen already in the last few years decentralized social networks such as Diaspora try to come up and bootstrap themselves. I think the key difference that tying a currency or tokens into that system can help is to just build in the monetization model. Just like Mastercoin got the funding required to develop the protocol by issuing the tokens, Mastercoins, then the social network, the future social network, could get the funding required to build the infrastructure, build and maintain the infrastructure components by tying itself to a coin. And these coins, these social coins, would be required to use the network, just like any other decentralized application. And this is not something that a specific group is working on right now. It's just an idea out there. But I think it's really powerful, and then that someone should pick this up and just run with it.
So for an example like that, again, going back to this idea of whether or not it's more efficient to use an existing infrastructure like Bitcoin and Mastercoin or to create an alt that does something entirely different, isn't part of the reason why mining is powerful from an incentive standpoint because the users get something for essentially free, right? There's no buy-in. It's just about attention and devoting your hardware to something, as opposed to like if you're talking about a social coin built on top of Mastercoin, someone actually has to buy the portions of Mastercoin in order to use the network, right?
I don't see mining as free at all. I think you're devoting your software to it, right? It's a proof of work, and then the work doesn't come free, and then today it doesn't even come cheap, right? You buy these dedicated hardware boxes and use them.
Well, for Bitcoin you do, but that's different for every coin that comes out.
Yeah, I mean, every coin has their own issuing mechanism, but the issuing is never free. You either give some stake or some CPU power or some hardware, but it's always tied to a physical resource. And also today's social networks, their monetization model is exploiting their users basically, or their data, and selling that to advertisers, right? That's pretty much explicit. There have been relatively few attempts at building products that really cater to the user. But with such a social networks such as Social Coin, a user could simply buy a coin that would maybe give him a lifetime supply or a lifetime access to this network. This is simply an alternative way to fund this effort.
So does everything trade against Mastercoin then? So do all of these user coins trade against Mastercoin and then Mastercoin trades against Bitcoin?
Yes.
So there are not fixed prices for user currencies. User currencies float against Mastercoin, which means that everything stays in balance regardless of the price.
Yeah, correct. I think one thing that we should emphasize, it's important to understand that Mastercoins per se are not required to issue any of these smart property or decentralized applications. You don't need to own a lot of Mastercoins or any Mastercoins to do that. You just issue them in a certain way, and you just pay the Bitcoin transaction fees that are required. But the new currencies are just created, and then you trade them in exchange for Mastercoins or whatever derived currency you want. But you don't have to own Mastercoins to do that.
So you accept Mastercoins from other people who want it, right?
Yeah, you can accept Mastercoins. You can also accept Bitcoins in a way that, like, Mastercoins can be the bridge between Bitcoin and all the other currencies.
Right. That makes sense to me. The bridge, Mastercoin is the bridge, makes sense to me. I'm trying to figure out if Mastercoin is actually necessary there or if you can just trade Bitcoin for something else. I mean, I guess there's not really a reason why you couldn't. There just needs to be an exchange that supports them both.
Yeah, we're not aware of a way to build a decentralized exchange without the Mastercoin tokens, right? Or there are ways, but they're theoretical,
right?
And they haven't been built. Mastercoin also serves an important function in the contracts for differences, which we haven't discussed, right? And that's just a way.
Right, that's the prediction market, right?
No, that's even before prediction market. Prediction market is taking a certain bet and then waging off or selling that bet off. The contracts for differences is just you and I or any two players in the system can make a contract that basically means that both of these players take positions on whatever asset they want, right? And that's really totally unrelated to the smart property feature. That's an entirely new area of Mastercoin. And the Mastercoins have value because they financially secure this contract, okay? And it's sort of a circular logic, but it works.
It's pretty incredible. I've been an entrepreneur for 12 years and I've built 6 technology companies, and I've never seen something grow as fast as Mastercoin. I mean, the number of developers that are getting involved. Before the fundraiser was done, somebody built buymastercoin.com and had an exchange, a private, manual exchange to buy Mastercoins at, right? Before I could go and set up the Twitter feed, 3 other people had set up the Twitter feed, right? Because there's no central plan, right? All these stakeholders participated and everybody's just doing things that benefit this. It's just pretty incredible to participate in because people are adding sort of all different types of value all the time. I mean, contracts for difference is an incredible example. The original spec talked about escrow-backed currencies, and it's sort of one of the more experimental and maybe this will work, maybe this won't kind of features of Mastercoin. And it was one of the people that was providing criticism to that suggested contracts for difference, which we realized was a really, really good, already proven mechanism to do what we wanted. And it ended up got it included in the spec, right? Because that was community feedback. Like, here's a better way to do that same thing. And so, the pace of evolution of the protocol and all the improvements that have been made, it's just been pretty incredible. I mean, we were less than 100 days in, and we've paid big bounties to developers, building the distributed exchange. We're adding new features and new technology based on a lot of input from the community, and dozens of people are already building new tech on top of it. So it's really cool to participate because it's the fastest growing project I've ever been a part of.
It's conversations like these that lead me to believe that Bitcoin is the foundation of the cryptocurrency movement rather than its crowning achievement. If listeners would like to learn more about either Mastercoin, BitAngels, or the broader classification work that either of you are doing, what are the best ways to do that?
There is mastercoin.org for all the information about that project. There is bitangels.co for the BitAngels group. And if you want, it's now up on GitHub to read the Decentralized application paper. And it's all open source. So give me pull requests, help me improve it. And I welcome input on the idea.
And you'll be able to reach that by letstalkbitcoin.com/DA. Letstalkbitcoin.com/DA will direct you to the white paper. David Johnson, Ron Gross, thanks very much for your time. I look forward to seeing your continued progress in the space as we move forward towards this future of decentralized applications.
Thanks for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Adam. I really enjoyed it.
Hi, this is Jason King for Bitcoin 100, and you're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is not really a talker. It's a doer, just like the best nonprofits and charity organizations. And at Bitcoin100.org, all we do is find hardworking nonprofits and charities and give them $1,000 in Bitcoin. That's all we do. So donate to Bitcoin 100 and let Bitcoin, nonprofits, and charities do what they do best.